Hello and welcome to part 2 of Deutschland erwacht, which of course means Germany awake. Hitler, in video 1 that you saw, is going to take power through a combination of persuasion and intimidation. It takes persuasion to get the vote to be able to establish the Nazi Party as a legitimate and legal party, but then it takes intimidation through events like the Night of the Long Knives to establish the Nazi control over Germany. But there's still that element of persuasion. Germans at this time are not a bunch of unthinking automatons who are easily brainwashed into just doing whatever the Fuhrer tells them to do. It requires persuasion for Hitler and the Nazis to convince Germans to believe absurdities so that they can commit atrocities later. Hitler and the Nazis create a very powerful, very potent propaganda program at this time, and part of that is in film. And so September of 1934 was a very important event for Hitler, and they're going to have their largest Nazi Party rally in their history. Ever since the 1920s, they've been meeting in Nuremberg in the Bavaria region of Germany and having these massive party rallies. So think of a modern political rally, all right? You all know, that our president and politicians that are trying to become president always have party rallies, and when they're meeting in their stadiums and their various locations, it's all a lot of shouting and chanting and saying the propaganda slogans, right? This is that times like 1,000% because of the numbers of people that are there, but also the way in which they tried to eternalize this moment. Okay, September 34 is important because the Deutschland Pact has just been signed. The SA is in town, and Hitler wants to confirm to them what happened back there in June. Not going to happen again. We got new people in charge. Everybody's swearing their allegiance to me, Hitler. Not going to happen again, SA. I promise you, I'm going to take care of you. And the way in which they eternalize this moment is through a film made by a female director by the name of Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl was a famous actress and filmmaker from Germany, and in the 1920s and 30s she made a lot of films, including the movie Pitzbaloo. So if you've seen Inglourious Bastards, for instance, you know that there's a lot of discussion of Leni Riefenstahl's movie quality in there, and she really is a tremendous filmmaker, and she's going to make what's been hailed as the greatest or most powerful piece of propaganda in world history. Some of the ways in which she'll do it. Okay, most Germans at this time had never been more than 3 or 4 stories above ground. But she opens the film, which is a 2-hour film. She opens the film with a camera angle that tracks Hitler's plane going through the air. Hitler was the first politician in world history to use a plane to get from point A to point B to give his speeches because he knew he could travel so much faster than on a train or an automobile. And so she tracks his plane flying into Nuremberg. No one had ever seen anything like that before. And then as the plane descends, she puts a camera in the cockpit and fly through the pilot's perspective, through the clouds, to see Nuremberg below and the hundreds of thousands of people waiting for Adolf Hitler. That's something that's scarily powerful. And then another thing that she did that was really incredible is most cameras at this time did not move, all right? They were usually on like a set tripod kind of thing and just kind of tracked motion side to side, but they didn't move. She put a camera not only in a plane, but also on a car and moved with Adolf Hitler to see the people loving him all around him and praising what he's doing. And the quality of film they were using is similar to the difference today between standard definition film and like 4K Ultra HD type of stuff. All right, so if those of you have ever seen a VHS tape or even DVD and you go back and look at standard definition film, you know it sucks. But then you compare that to like 4K and your mind's blown. She's using that kind of technological jump in movie making history, and she will make history with this film. So here's a little video to show you some of the highlights of that film and also to talk about its influence.
Unter der Fahne leben wir, unter der Fahne leben wir, unter der Fahne lauten Entschwung, fahren wir alle nach vorwärts den Sprung.
If you were a devoted Nazi Party member, the summer ended, as they all did, with the annual pilgrimage to Nuremberg for the party rally. For the faithful, This was the most highly anticipated event on the Nazi calendar. But the rally of 1934 would be particularly special because this year they would film the most influential piece of Nazi propaganda ever made.
What I witnessed in Nuremberg is one of the most remarkable events I have ever experienced. I cannot compare it to anything I've ever experienced before as an artist.
Mein Führer, ich melde 52.000 Arbeitsmänner zum Appell angetreten. Heil, Arbeitsmänner! Heil, mein Führer!
To capture the glory of the Third Reich, filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl helped to stage it, directing and rehearsing this scene at least 50 times.
Kamerad, woher stammst du? Aus Friesenland. Und du, Kamerad? Vom Kaiserstuhl. Und du? Von der Donau, vom Rhein und von der Saar. Ein Volk. Ein Führer, ein Reich, ein Land.
The film Triumph of the Will premiered to worldwide acclaim, winning awards in Germany, Venice, and finally, Paris. Within a year of that award, Adolf Hitler was named Time magazine's Man of the Year.
So remember, as we're talking about Adolf Hitler, he used a combination of persuasion and intimidation to get to power. Today we're seeing both. We're seeing the intimidation, certainly, but he had that persuasive influence. And this film, which is going to air not only on silver screens in Germany, but all over the world and win at film festivals and win awards across the world, it will also be shown to students throughout Germany during the entirety of Hitler's reign in power. This is a very powerful film. By the way, there's not a single reference in this film to anti-Semitism. Not once does Hitler reference his anti-Semitic beliefs. Leni Riefenstahl and Joseph Goebbels, got together and said, we should tone that down so that we can popularize this film throughout the world and make it more marketable. And so that was an effective propaganda technique. And Leni Riefenstahl, by the way, she will live to see something like her 90th or 95th birthday before she died in the early 2000s. But she will go to her death claiming that she was never a Nazi. Yeah, watch the film and you can see she sure made him look good for not being a Nazi. The man that is going to be the one to tell Hitler that Leni Riefenstahl should make this film was Joseph Goebbels. He was the head of the propaganda machine that will be created after Hitler comes to power. And through the use of the Hitler Youth and the Hitler Moderns, they know that they're appealing to a younger audience that is more impressionable. I'd recommend everybody see Jojo Rabbit if you haven't already. It's an incredible work that's satirical of the Hitler Youth and Hitler Moderns, but it really shows just the influence and power that this movement had on kids. And you look at these kids, and it's so creepy to us today. It's absolutely creepy, as it should be, because parents who are hearing about the news of some of the things they're up to are absolutely flabbergasted. But by the time you get to 1936, it was mandatory. It was law that you had to participate once you were over the age of 10 to be a part of the Hitler Youth. And even the former Pope Emeritus Pope Benedict, was growing up in Germany, and he too was part of the Hitler Youth because he was forced to by law after 1936. So here's another video that helps show what it was like and some of the creepiness of this whole thing.
Peter Hartmann was proud to be a German boy. And so he joined the Hitler Youth. By 1936, all children over 10 were required to join, whether they were willing or not. The many thousands of new members were to be presented to Hitler as a gift for his 48th birthday. If you were a 10-year-old boy in Germany, you too might have wanted to join after watching films like this.
Sag Mutter. Ach, wir haben abgekocht, geturnt und geschwommen und gesungen. Ein Lied haben die gesungen, sag ich dir. Und wie ging das noch? Das habe ich doch vergessen. Unsere Fahne. Warte mal, jetzt habe ich. Unsere Fahne flattert uns voran.
For our field exercises, our squad has to find the other squad through military reconnaissance. Once the enemy squad is found, there are fistfights. This exercise is supposed to teach us that comradeship, as they call it, is formed in battle.
We are dreadfully worried. The boys won't listen to us anymore. When my wife insisted that our oldest obey, he drew his dagger and assaulted her. He shouted, "I belong to the Führer first. The family comes second."
Within 2 years, nearly 8 million children had taken the Hitler Youth Oath of Allegiance. I swear to devote myself to Adolf Hitler.
I am willing and ready to give up my life. So help me God.
In the end, many of them would.
In the eyes of our beloved leader, the mother is the most important person in the nation. We are Germany's hope in the future. And it is our duty to breed and rear the new generation of sons and daughters.
This female division of the Hitler Youth was filmed hiking outside Munich in 1937. Participation was mandatory for these girls, who were required to document that they were Aryan and free of hereditary disease.
Dear Mother and Father, in our camp there are 48 girls. Near us is a boys' camp. We see the boys very often and mend their clothing as we spend the evenings with them. A funny thing, of these 48 girls, 35 are pregnant. And still funnier, I'm one of the 35.
Upon learning of her daughter's pregnancy, one girl's horrified mother rushed to the camp to investigate and discipline her daughter. The 16-year-old replied hotly that if her mother did not go home and leave her alone, she would report her to the camp leader, who would in turn report the mother to the Gestapo, who would then take action against her for sabotaging German motherhood.
Geez, with quotes like "Fuhrer, we belong to you." Oh man, I'm creeped out. And you heard about the what'll happen to Nazi girls and boys in the camps, and they're basically told, "Go mate, please," because then you can be one of the Fuhrer's brides. Oh, the strength through joy propaganda campaign is another element of how the Nazis were trying to show that we are a workers group. We want to provide for your needs, and you can see that here through this poster of the idealized German Aryan man who's working hard and he's ripped and he's building for Germany. And then in the background you can see the farmers that are also getting some mad props here. We are building for Germany. And then something else that the Nazis did is they insisted that everybody take vacations, and they would give you time off, paid leave, to go on these lengthy vacations. Keep in mind that this isn't long after the Industrial Revolution, where people were working 6 days a week for 12 hours a day or more. And now the Nazis are saying, take time off. Go have some fun. Go to the islands in the North Sea that Germany owns, and we've got a cruise ship for you that's cheap, and we'll basically be paying your way to go have yourself a fun vacation on a cruise ship. As you can see here, go have fun. As long as you're Aryan or Volk, that is. You're not allowed if you're someone who's not an Aryan or Volk. And speaking of the Volk, what are we going to build for the people? A Peopleswagen, a people's car. That's right, the Volkswagen for the Volk und Aryans. And then if you're a rich Aryan, you can afford the Daimler-Benz or Mercedes, but whatever. Another thing that Hitler and the Nazis will do under their propaganda machine is emphasize the importance of human biology, and basically put forward their plans for eugenics by emphasizing the importance of Aryan and Volk women having as many children as possible, and also telling them that they have their place in this system. So they will prioritize women. So in many ways it's empowering women at this time, but at the same time empowering them to be in the home, to leave the jobs to the men, because women were easier to hire at this time because they were so much cheaper during the Great Depression for work But at the same time, the Nazis want the men in the factories to get those jobs, and they want women to go home and breed and to have as many children as possible. They viewed women as producers of the purified race of Aryan and Volk, and a lot of science went into female bodies that before had been illegal or had not been discussed because it was too taboo. But looking into cycles, and also looking into the impact of drinking upon maternity and babies in utero, also looking at the impact of smoking upon children as they're growing in utero. We know that information because the Nazis are going to develop that information by experimenting, unfortunately, in concentration camps upon pregnant Jews, but also by emphasizing that women need to be healthy, they need to be active, they need to avoid alcohol while pregnant, avoid smoking while pregnant, because they are the ones that create the ideal human race. But if you're not part of the ideal, if you are someone that suffers from, let's say, diabetes, an inheritable disease that you can get from genetics, or something like anxiety or depression, or what they would call at the time melancholia, if you have a disease that today we would treat medically, but is something that can be carried on through your genetics, they would force you to be sterilized by law. Under the Nuremberg laws, it was not just about Jews and other people that were seen as subhumans, but it was focusing upon Germans as well, who were seen as having the wrong genetic characteristics. So if you've got a child who is cognitively delayed, the families would be told by the government that we're taking your child to a hospital. That hospital would kill those children because they were seen as a quote-unquote drain on society. And then the parents would often be sterilized because there was fear from the Nazis that they could produce more children like that. And the method of sterilization at this time could have been things like, for instance, cauterizing female genitalia. They would also give males who had poor genetic traits these chemical compounds in pill form, where they would take these for long enough so that their testicles basically rot off. The result for the Nazis, though, is that those that do fit this system, those that do like what they're seeing from the Nazis, they see this as an empowering moment in which they are rising up in this system, and they like the fact that the people that they don't want to see in this system are being removed. It's a very powerful and scary totalitarian movement as the result. Daniel Goldhagen is a historian who proposes what's called the Nazi Revolution. He claims that it was a revolutionary movement that Hitler and the Nazis were creating that radically transformed Germany. He's got an intriguing but very inflammatory or radical, controversial book about it called Hitler's Willing Executioners. Now, I've read it, and so I can tell you that it is radical because he proposes things that take it to an extreme. So basically, he's arguing that Hitler and the Nazis were wanted in power in Germany, which we've seen for a lot of people was true. But at the same time, he's arguing that the people that allowed the Holocaust to happen actually wanted it to happen. That the Nazis were just doing what the German people wanted in the first place because of their inherent racism against the Jews. And that's definitely taking it to an extreme. Basically, he's arguing that if anyone did not resist the Nazis, they became a bystander who are just as guilty as everyone else of actively killing Jews. And that's a radical theory, once again, something we can debate. But it's kind of like today, if you were to say that because I am doing nothing actively to stop abortion, that I somehow support abortion, that I'm not working to illegalize it actively, I must be participating in it. And that's not it, okay? That's taking it to an extreme. But I think that something that Goldhagen argues very effectively is about the radical nature of this Nazi revolution as they come to power. Because the Nazis really did radically change Germany, and they dramatically altered its social and political landscape in many different ways. Now, there was little widespread, I would say, overt resistance. There's many people that quietly wanted to resist, but again, that intimidation factor comes in, and early in Hitler's rise to power, he shows that what happens to those that resist. And so, yes, there was little widespread overt resistance, but Hitler is also a very effective propaganda propagandist himself. Both Daniel Goldhagen and Robert Downes, in his books that changed the world, talk about Hitler's effectiveness in propaganda, and they talk about how he used repetition and short, simple phrases. So today our politicians do the exact same thing, but honestly, we learned that tactic from Hitler. If you just say the same thing and you say it quickly and you say it enough, people start to believe it. Also, he used psychological tricks to bring about a complete emotional capitulation. What that means is, I think of it like when you go to a concert. When you go to a concert, it's usually at night, right? You usually go to a nighttime rock concert, let's say, and you're just waiting. You're just waiting for Post Malone to come on the stage. And they have these introductory people that come on first. And you're like, all right, come on, get me through the opening acts. I want to see Post or whoever, right? And so you're waiting for this performer, and they're always late, aren't they? Well, Hitler did the same thing. He was always late. He always made people wait. They didn't give them chairs to sit in. They made you stand there. So it's late at night. You see all these other people around you that are so excited, and eventually you just give up on your resistance. And you're like, you're tired, and it's like Hitler shows up like a rock star, and you're like, yeah, all right, finally, I can't wait to hear what he has to say. And you just kind of swallow it, what he has to say. There's also the mass suggestion in huge rallies, making you feel like a minority if you don't believe the things that he says, and if you're shouting out against it somehow or not saluting, that makes you the minority. There's also the education system, which is going to work on whether it be the Hitler Youth or in schools themselves, convincing children of the necessity of the Nazis and the removal of inferior races. And then when you lie big. Okay, so Hitler would make these audacious claims that normally you'd be like, what? No, we're going to fact check that. That is garbage. There's no way that's true. But he just keeps saying it, and he keeps lying bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, for instance, that, a communist Jew is the one that obviously attacked the Reichstag and therefore give me all the power. It's like, what? No. Why would? But then the more you hear it, it's like, and then there's 100,000 people around me saying, yeah, all right, fine. Another thing, too, is anytime you give a speech, there's always a single scapegoat. You always have a single devil that you're talking about, whether that's the Treaty of Versailles or subhumans or Jews or France or you name it, Bolsheviks. There's always a single demon that you must attack in your speech. And you don't overcomplicate, because the people will start to think if it's overcomplicated. If you keep it short and simple, people will believe it. Keep in mind, these aren't stupid people. These aren't brainwashed, robotic people that are, removed of any autonomy. They're free thinking. That many of them smart. Many of them grew up before the Nazis and know what normal is. But because of so much of this throughout German society, it's so incredibly impactful that it convinces an entire society to either not say anything and not resist, or to actively engage with this process. Let's see a video that talks about how Hitler achieved this.
It was September 15th, 1935. And once again, the Nazi faithful were gathering in Nuremberg. In a speech that was broadcast to the nation, Hitler addressed what he called the Jewish problem.
Ist der Versuch der gesetzlichen Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz zur endgültigen Lösung der nationalsozialistischen Partei übertragen werden müsste. Hinter allen drei Gesetzen steht die Partei und mit ihr und hinter ihr die deutsche Nation.
After these three laws were read, the halls rang with minute-long applause. It was the call of a wild animal, a beast that smells blood.
The German people turning into a beast that smells blood, that are actively participating here against people that the Nazis hate. And so their racial policies, again, have been analyzed by so many different historians. And the one we'll look at today and argue later is Goldhagen. Once again, because of the radicalism of his statement, I think it's worthy of our consideration, if for nothing else, for us to argue against it. So he argues that Germany was in the midst of a eliminationist anti-Semitism. Eliminationist means that it goes beyond simply hating Jews or having racial theories against Jews, but it means actively hating them to the point where they must die and must be removed in a final solution to the Judenfrage, or Jewish question. And I look at it this way, like if America in the 1920s or 30s had a racist president who galvanized the South and galvanized free-thinking, autonomous individuals, smart people, to believe that all of these problems of racism that we've had and racial issues that we've had throughout our history, the best solution is to remove all African Americans. You can imagine that, thankfully, I would hope that our country wouldn't do that, wouldn't go through something like that. But if the factors were in the right place for a dictator to make that happen, if the state is behind this thing, many people would have gone along with it. A lot of people wouldn't have. But if they're in a system like what we have going on in Nazi Germany, you can imagine this kind of thing could have happened. And we see these things happening in genocidal activities throughout the 20th and 21st century as well. It's not just Germany. And that's why I think Goldhagen's theory is worthy of our consideration, because he looks at the Nuremberg racial laws about how the Nazis are claiming that they're trying to prevent racial pollution. And there's enough racist idiots out there that are believing this theory. He and the Nazis are going to orchestrate physical and verbal attacks. You can see some of those protests happening there at the bottom picture about how the Nazis are going to use that intimidation factor to say, join us, not them, because they're the outsiders. They're the people that are evil, and we don't want to be having any kind of influence. They're also going to further intensify any anti-Semitic belief through mass suggestion and mass rallies, where an entire rally will be gathering specifically for the argument against Jews. And there will be posters saying, women and young girls of Germany, beware of Jews, because they will be your downfall. That downfall they're referencing is sexual pollution. Another thing that is highly controversial here is that Goldhagen is going to make the argument that the Nazis were able to transform Jews into socially dead beings. What that means is that the Nazis were able to convince Germans that Jews who were formerly a big part of society, that might have been your neighbor, they might have been, thinkers, doctors, you name it, they're not alive anymore, and we therefore have a right to remove them to a ghetto, to isolate them, and then to take them to a death camp, or to kill them in the street, or you name it, to eliminate these people that used to be participants in society. Now, the way they did that was through the Nuremberg laws, by making it illegal to be a Jewish citizen. Their citizenship rights were taken away from them. So that's the first step. The next step will be to isolate them into ghettos. The next step, of course, is also wearing the Star of David, and then removal from society entirely into a death camp where they will be eliminated. And so while, again, this is a very controversial radical theory, Goldhagen argues that that's the steps that they took to make Jews into people that no longer existed in society, where society would say, yeah, we don't care about the Jews because, they're dead to us. That's taking things a bit far with the theory, but it might have some credence. All right, another thing that he argues that the Nazis did is they created social consensus of the need to eliminate the Jewish threat. Again, going back to that terminology, the Judenfrage. If there's a Jewish question, there must be a Jewish problem. And if there's a problem, we must have a solution, or a final solution to that problem. A big part of building up this belief system against Jews was through anti-Semitic propaganda. You can see here a book that was written for school children called The Poisonous Mushroom. And in this book, it articulated that there are good mushrooms in the forest and there are bad mushrooms in the forest. And you must find a way to figure out which mushrooms are poisonous and which ones are good. And so the book goes through this page, for instance, where you can see references to how you've got a Volk teacher, by the way, Volk teacher, brown hair, brown-eyed. And then behind him is a map of Germany. And then here you've got Aryan kids. All right, so I just want to point out the fact that you've got Aryan children and a Volk teacher. What's that a reference to? Hitler teaching the Aryan race how this needs to happen. And then on the board, you can see the teacher has asked this student to come up and talk about what are the characteristics that make someone Jewish. And these are the physical characteristics, according to the Nazis, of how you can look for a Jew and target them in society. Here is the international Jew, and this is a poster talking about how the Jewish man is carrying a switch or a whip, basically, to hit you. He is a money lender and a money maker through banking, and yet he's still a Bolshevik commie somehow. Doesn't make sense, right? And yet this is the typical arguments used against Jews. Here you can see the Jewish influence that's seeking to take over the world, and they are dehumanizing Jews by making them into this giant octopus. You can see here in the mass rally, here are the different campaign slogans that I was referencing earlier, where at this mass rally it says, "The Jews are our misfortune, and women and girls, the Jews are your ruin." So in America, this is a very similar kind of tactic that they used of referencing white female maidenhood and white female protection, protecting women against these rapacious African Americans that were going to take them. In fact, most of the lynchings that took place in the South in the 1900s, early 1900s, until the Jim Crow era finally ends in 1964, most of the lynchings that will take place will be precipitated by a claim of a black man trying to rape a white woman. And so this is the same kind of claim that the Nazis are making here. And interesting fact, the Nazis learned a lot of their racial isolation policies from looking at Jim Crow in the South. They learned a lot of their racial theories from looking at how African Americans were treated throughout American history, whether it be under slavery, whether it be on plantations in an isolated system where we're not looking at what's happening to them, or with Jim Crowism after, as they were created into maybe not socially dead beings, but certainly removed from active participation in society. I make that clear because it's obvious that this is not just a German phenomenon, and it could have happened and will happen in other countries as well. And another indication of this, you can see a poster. Joseph Goebbels took over the filmmaking industry with the propaganda machine, and one of the films that they came out with was called Yud Sus, and it's about a Jewish man who is trying to bring about the downfall of society through various methods, one of which is sexual things and taking female maidenhood in Germany and perverting the race through that method. And here you can see a handout or a pamphlet that was given, and the reason you give a pamphlet instead of a book is because a pamphlet is quick and easy. It's got those short, simple phrases that are easily repeated, like "Wenn du dies Zeichen siehst, Jude." And this phrase here means, when you see this symbol, Jew, you're supposed to think bad things. The color scheme says it all. The red behind the yellow Star of David says blood, it says fire, it says murder. Avoid this person at all costs when you see this symbol. Another children's book here, geared towards children that are around the kindergarten through third grade age group. This is making a connection between Jewish people and a fox in the meadow, because a fox in the meadow is not one to be trusted. Similarly, who are you going to trust here, kids? Who would you rather have as your friend, playmate, or even, possible husband? Would you rather have this guy? Pretend you don't know that he has money. But would you rather have this guy, or would you have this strapping male who's an Aryan? Well, unfortunately, kindergarten kids are primarily going to probably look at this and psychologically say, I'd rather be that strapping Aryan, or rather be with that strapping Aryan. These are the kinds of things that Hitler and the Nazis are able to do after the Enabling Act. So with Deutschland erwacht, we will get back to how this is going to enable Hitler and the Nazis to perpetrate the war in World War II, but also to galvanize the German people to accept these policies and seek the victory of Germany in the coming conflict, and bring about the Holocaust as well. And it's just as Voltaire famously said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities."